Alright everybody, so welcome back to this episode of Would I Buy? And this is a very strange one. So I will actually sort of say, before I actually go into what I think and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to actually just say to you right now, beforehand, have you ever been in a situation where, I don't know, have you ever actually just jumped into something not really knowing anything about it, like watched a film, or as I say, played a game where you literally didn't have a clue what it were going to be like, what it were going to be about, or anything like that? That is pretty much what I was like when it came into this. So before I actually continue into it any further, I'm going to talk somewhat spoilers, I suppose you could say, of the demo. Obviously not of the overall game, but of the demo. And the demo itself is about, it took me a good couple of hours, and yeah, but I could easily say maybe about 2 to 3 hours you'd be spending on this demo. So I'm going to just say, yeah, I would just say, before you go into anything, if you don't want anything to be spoiled, I would say just play the demo and see what you think. The only thing I will say, actually, if you do like more text-based games, I'll say, because it's a heavily text-based game, if you like that kind of game, just go into it now. I don't want to spoil anything more. Okay? Right. So I will talk into it. I'll talk more about my experience now. So when I first looked at the picture, I presumed it was going to be, was it like that Dragon Roper? A very heavily text-based game, and yeah, I weren't too sure. So I clicked on it, went into the game, and what kind of greeted me was this top-down shooter, and I'm like, what? What is going on here? Is it a top-down shooter with, like, what? So anyway, I was all ready to start thinking about how, is it just a shooter with, you know, with like story in between, and or is it just a sort of a very strange top-down shooter inspired type game? And I was ready to just judge it as that. And being honest, the top-down shooter, usually I was not a big fan of the top-down ones that you see in the game. I'm usually a fan like of the Thunder Force type ones, where it's all like R-type, where it was side-scrolling shoot 'em ups. I just, for some reason, just could never get into the top-down one. But anyway, so that I did. I played through that part, and then it kind of started with the story. And at first I was thinking, okay, not too sure about this. It seems like it could be interesting, but I weren't too sure. But then, as like one of the characters sort of showed up, I actually started thinking, oh my god, is this actually like, is this sort of like a text-based Squid Games, or a text-based like Battle Royale? And now we're just thinking, oh, and they started talking about like taking us to the amusement park and stuff, where we'll be playing some games. And I'm like, oh my gosh, actually is going to be like Battle Royale and like Squid Games and stuff. And I was actually getting sort of really into it then. So you get to the island, and then, so like I say, yes, this is all in story, by the way. It's like I say, it's a very heavily text-based game. So we get to the island, and then we are greeted with all these different characters, and then I suddenly start to realise all these people are essentially like been in prison, and they all seem to be like partnered up with different people, all for like different crimes, different type of things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and all these characters seemed like they could be really interesting. And the characters that I was playing as also was like really interesting, and then I get partnered up with someone, and yeah, as the game sort of progressed, I'm like thinking, oh my god, is it this like gonna be going into a location of Squid Games, and I'm just gonna be playing like a mini game as the Squid Game? And I'll be honest, not quite. No, it's not quite like that, but it is a very interesting concept that's I don't think I've actually seen. It's a similar sort of fashion in terms of like Battle Royale and Squid Games, but not, which obviously I'll go into. So then you go into, when it comes into your rooms, it sort of mixes, and I really like this, it mixes the heavy text based with a bit like of, I suppose you could say, an escape puzzle or short puzzles. They're not really escape room situations, they're more like simple puzzles that you solve, and I'll be honest, they weren't like overly complicated where you I'll be honest, I did have to use, like, you get the hint system, it gives you like 3 hints for each puzzle, and I really enjoyed that because I kind of went into them, and although they didn't seem like overly complicated, I didn't really get at first what it wanted me to do, but obviously after a couple of hints I was able to work it out from then. And I do actually really like the puzzles in this, and yeah, it was me being an idiot. I had to use some of the hints, but I actually really enjoyed the hints. I really enjoyed the puzzles in this, but then it sort of very much becomes a bit of a mystery of what's actually happening here. And like I said, there's going to be a big spoiler warning right now, which I'll go into it more in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so basically what is happening here is that you are playing the prisoner, and the person you are partnered up with is actually the victim of a crime that you've committed. And obviously the whole time you are basically like saying you didn't commit this, you know, you were framed and all, and it goes through all that scenario, and it's actually really well done. Like the animation for all the characters here, it is really well done. Usually it's just still frames when it comes to these text-based things, but I kind of liked that a lot of the characters were, the mouths were moving as they were speaking. Obviously it's all in Japanese is the voice, but so I will be honest, I kind of obviously skip a lot of it and I just read and read and read, but it was actually very well written here. And so yeah, obviously the point is you are, or have been in prison for a crime that you didn't commit, and now you are being paired up with a victim of that so-called crime that's basically out to, has the choice to kill you at any given time. So you go through this scenario in the room and you start to learn more about what your character has done and how it ties up with your victim, and that becomes, it's actually quite interesting. And it became quite intriguing, the mystery, and you know, I was very much well into the story here of what was happening, and it kind of tugs a little bit on the odd few heartstrings as well. It was very well sort of put together and written. And likewise, after you go through that section, you then make it through to the next part of the game, and this is very strange because then it sort of goes back into the shooter mode, which is basically like a simulation. And I suppose the best way I can describe this is basically like, imagine the courtroom scenes from Ace Attorney where you have your penalties, and if you get something penalties wrong, you basically, yeah, you lose lives. So basically you start off the simulation, I'll say that in quotation marks, a simulation where you basically show your understanding of what's happened throughout the crime, and that basically determines your life counter that you go into the game with. And then basically it goes back into your shooter, and the more obviously the more questions you get right, the more lives you get, and you basically then start playing through a side shooting scroll them up. That's interesting. Yeah, top-down shooter. And basically your boss, which goes on for quite some time, your boss ends up being your victim, where basically you are now challenged and faced with having to try and get through to your victim by essentially destroying the enemy boss, which is sort of like, I suppose it's sort of like a way of saying it's their inner mind or thoughts and stuff like that. But obviously in between those shoot 'em up sections where they basically you're in a boss battle, you then faced with Ace Attorney type scenarios where if you get it wrong, you essentially lose your lives. Now I'll be honest, this actually I thought really made everything so tense, because not only were you having to dodge the projectiles as you would get in a shoot 'em up, you know, it kind of really weighed down a lot more, because usually when you play those top-down shooters, you get game over. I don't really care. I actually really did not want to die in this. I really didn't want to get my shit blown up, and it felt like there was a lot more weight on the scenario, because obviously this was your character having his chance to get through, and if he died, obviously in the shoot 'em up sections, he essentially died in real life in the game, obviously. But likewise, during the sections where I suppose you could say it's like a cross-examination, where you are presented with a bunch of evidence, and it's basically like saying, oh well, I did not commit this crime because of this piece of evidence that shows that. And it reminded me a lot of like Ace Attorney, where you're having to obviously give your objections, where obviously if you would get it wrong, you would essentially get a penalty. And it's that kind of situation, but obviously it was more strange, because whereas in Ace Attorney you can just sort of save, I don't know how it worked in this. I'll be honest, I didn't let myself die. I was so engrossed, and I really did not want, so I really actually wanted to get things right. Even though I did make quite a few mistakes, and it was pretty intense when it were coming to the end. So not only are you having to not die in the shoot 'em up, you are having to not die or not choose the incorrect options. And everything really sort of, it became intense, and I'm loving it. I was loving it. And likewise when it came to the end of it there, oh my gosh, yeah, I was pumped. I was so intrigued. The characters were so unique, so different. The story was so different and unique. I actually really wanted to know where the story were going on. It sort of branches out into this big mystery, and I'm presuming you'll learn a lot more about the other characters. Obviously in the demo you only learn about our basic first two characters that you see, but you do meet all the other characters, and it kind of makes me really intrigued now to see what some of the other stories are and how they branch into it all with their potential crimes. So no, I would definitely say, if you are a fan of your shooters and you just see the shooter sections, I would say I wouldn't go on the shooter sections alone. This is a very story-driven, the impression I get, it's a very story-driven game is this one. It's a very text-based heavy game. So I will say, if you are just looking at the shooter sections, going with very much a word of caution there. But obviously you've got the demo, you can see for yourself. Very heavy text-based. If you are into your story-based, text-based games, I would say definitely give this a shot. And as for would I buy it, I actually think I really would. And I actually think it's a really decent price actually. What is, was it £35 for this one as well, or 36? And I thought that were really good. Like, this is the kind of thing I expect. Some games probably would have ended up charging more, so yeah, I actually probably would go for this game. Definitely, I really enjoyed this, and it were intense. So I'm intrigued on where it will go. But as I say, that's my opinion. I'm kind of curious what you guys think. Have you played the demo? What do you think? Is it something that you really got into, or is it something that really turned you off? Are you into these text-based games, or did you hate it? You know, let me know in the comments. And as I say, I will see you on the next one. Laters.
あの手紙を表ゆるキルトレインでお前に没収されて、
あれを表示すればいいんです。
リナさん、俺たち囚人は執行人と会う前船で運ばれてきた。その時俺のいた監獄の
その手紙は
改めて聞いてここに書いてあることは、真犯人俺はポストに家の鍵を入れることにしてたが、なのにこの手紙を書いたやつは家の鍵はポストに入れるな。そんなこと無関係の人間。真犯人はわからない。でも俺以外に誰かがいるんだ。俺が死ぬようなことになっても彼女に手をかけさせちゃいけない。彼女は復讐にとらわれてそれでいいのか。どうせ俺は一生投獄されることが決まってる。だったらなんだ。
意外とやりますね。あれは心コア。皆様の心の中心部です。
あれを壊せばいい。
死んで。
ああ、このロボットに乗ったリナさんを倒さなければ、リナさんは俺を殺したら、そうなったら納得してもらう。その方法はだがリナさん、俺は
後のあなたの行動を見て、
リナさん、
それにあなたが言うように、もし囚人の中、私にはその人が誰か家族のために ちこのゆるキルラン、あなたも真犯人を見つけたいなら私とあなた。
いいな。いいだ。
それでは次の勝ち残った一人は冤罪を晴らすことができる。
兄さんを殺すなんて一言も言ってないだろ。
私が誰か忘れてない？オッケー、二人とも死んでもらおう。
今の神楽に話は通じね
事件記録。
無事に終わるなら何でもいいです。
え。もう限界だ。このままでは死んでしまう。
つまらないです。すっごい建物だね。
壮観ですね。
誰にも共感されなくたっていい。だから頑張れるんじゃない。
覚悟を見せてください。
そっちの少女に見せるようなものではない。君だけで来るんだ。
事件をかすめ取ろうとしているのですわ。
これは人形じゃない、本物の死体だ。
許す、お切る、ゆるキルジャッジメントスタートです。
冤罪執行遊戯ゆるキル。